It's the summer of 2014. I'm sat on a chair in the shade with family on a lawn by the sea in my hometown. A man comes along. He has seen me from afar, and as if he recognized me, he makes his way straight to where I am. He points at my arm, where a black stripe of fabric strategically hides the peak, which is the central venous catheter through which I receive chemotherapy. A pink and gray headscarf is casually wrapped around my head, my new hairstyle for the time being. The man stares at me and cheerfully says to my mom, "Congratulations, black belt, isn't it?" I have to stop my mother's urge to tell him, just like a typical Italian, that no, it's not karate, my current specialty. The day I was told I had breast cancer was a grey English day in November 2013. And although the actual watershed moment that I always refer to came the following March, the day of my mastectomy, I'm still fond of that far, cold afternoon, because it was, after all, the beginning of my journey. How would your life change if tomorrow you or someone you love received a cancer diagnosis? The reputation of this illness is terrible indeed. The taboo, cancer equals death, still makes many casualties among both sick and healthy people. However, this is a story about life. Mine has literally been a rebirth, and not just because I survived it. My existence until that moment had always felt like a struggle only I seemed to be aware of. I was focused and bright during my studies and later in my jobs, but I had no idea of what loving myself and completely accepting myself meant, because I had always been loved with limitations. There were not so much limitations in the content as in the communication, but I didn't know that. And so I used to erect walls every time people seemed hostile or insensitive or if they judged me, because I felt deep down that they were right. I was never enough. I never did enough. I didn't know how to grant myself the grace of forgiveness. Cancer saved my life. In a matter of minutes, all of my fears were swept away by an extraordinary ability to be present to myself, a lucid peace, a clear intent that has never left me since, not even 4 surgeries and 6 months of chemo later. You see, I'm deeply persuaded of this. Every test hides a blessing, because crisis is an opportunity. We can only make peace with our true self once we know who we are. But in order to know who we are, we need to be challenged. Because only once we're pushed to our limits, we re-question everything we have and everything we are. There is only one condition, though. We must be willing to learn. There are endless lessons that I have learned in the last 3 years alone. But if I had to say which is the core of my beliefs, I would pick one concept that still fits my actions and holds me up like a huge centenary tree from which every other part branches off. And the concept is that we are never completely powerless. There are no magic tricks involved, just one crucial element, and that's attitude. Most of the times, attitude plays a major role in determining how events will unfold. And it's what can turn a curse into a blessing. There is a quote by Albert Einstein: "There are only 2 ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle." Do you know this quote? That's the key. Even within the toughest experiences, there is a fundamental difference between remaining stuck in a reaction and exercises the infinite power of choice. Reaction is instinctive. It often mirrors a mindset. And just like habits, it's hard to change, unescapable, overwhelming. But choice is what must come afterwards. At any given moment, we can choose to consider how we can affect what is happening to us. This notion has changed completely the way that I relate to other people, because now I choose carefully who and what can be in my life and the conditions that are good for me. I would never change the person that I became after cancer to go back to any of the previous versions of myself. Every day, in spite of everything, my heart is full of satisfied joy for the challenges that I was able to face and for what I managed to share with the people that I choose to have by my side. No matter how severe the threat to our peace is, I think that we can always find our way through the havoc, because there is a strength in us we didn't even know we had, and it rests on two pillars. Always look after yourself first, and never stop acting with empathy. One of the most powerful lessons that I have learned is that by looking after myself first, by being kind to myself first, which often means refusing to be pushed in uncomfortable corners just to please others, I was able to look after and love others more effectively. And that's because, being so much more aware of my self-worth, I no longer feel scared to love and to accept the inevitable risks that might come from investing in others. I remember being struck by the evocative power of Steve Jobs' words. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow reconnect in your future. We can't connect the dots looking forward, that's true. But we can connect ourselves to others. People have helped me during my cancer experience directly. Very often, perfect strangers or people met randomly have been able to connect with me and to help me more than my own family. My mother's reaction to my pain, for example, was so angry and so difficult for me to handle that it's been one of the main challenges, possibly much harder than the illness itself. But I have also been very much helped indirectly by focusing my attention on what was happening to the people in my life. I was reminded that there was still a world out there with its problems and its joy, and that made me put my situation in perspective and even feel grateful. I think that the only way that we can overcome anything, together with really listening to our own needs, is turning to others. Because by looking after them and receiving their inputs, we build relationships. And that reminds us so powerfully of how connected and how similar we all are. Of course, no one is hopeful and grateful all the time. Today, 3 years in, I still face so many challenges. If it is common knowledge that facing the therapies can be quite demanding, no one ever talks about the afterwards. Once the chemo is over, once the hair has grown back, everyone wants to assume that you're well. They make you understand that it is urgent going back to normality. Needless to say, there is no longer a normality. My normality now is seizing the extraordinary within the ordinary. But the truth is, if no one ever talks about the afterwards, it's because there are no magic tricks or rules to face it. Suddenly, I was an orphan of a routine made up of dates, therapies, meetings that had become familiar, almost comforting. My body has a different geography now. The chronic fatigue left by months of chemo is made even worse by the side effects of the hormone therapy, which steals my thoughts, my sleep. It makes even normal activities an effort. Not to mention how superficial people can be, whether they are healthy or sick, friends or strangers. Sometimes their carelessness has the power to anger me, and it contracts my heart in a painful spasm, even though I have known and overcome a serious illness. Even though in the last 3 years, I have more than one cried all of my tears for each of the super brave warriors that I had to let go of forever. After all, a wound is still a wound, and it hurts. Even on a body that went through amputation, even on a soul that learned how to fly. And so I made a decision. And I decided that I was going to become the super brave warrior of my life. And so can you. Traumatic events can transform your life overnight. So how can I still love mine unconditionally, despite so many changes might not have been for the best? What's left in front of death, sickness, in front of excruciating memories? What is left besides emptiness and fear? Me. I am what's left. I'm the reborn. I'm the witness of life. It's only when I tried to assess where I was at that it dawned on me. Despite having been reborn roughly 3 years ago, there will still be so many ways in which I might lose myself and then find myself again. And what's more important, these two things might often happen at the same time. I can never take for granted the knowledge of who I am. It's not true that others makes us feel powerless, hungry, humiliated. It's we ourselves who makes this possible. It's we who abdicate, after all, our power to stand by the door of our soul and deny unwelcome people the entry. I think that there is a source of immense joy that comes from our will to learn repeatedly how to look at the same things from different points of view. Sometimes seizing the moment has more to do with the moment that we let go of than with the moment we embrace, so that we can respect the apparent slowness that we need or that others might require. Sometimes, if love is real love, it needs nothing else but to be expressed. Now I get it. Serenity should not be shouted aloud. It should be offered as a gift. It's as if we turned on the light in a dark, crowded room. It doesn't just help us to find a direction. At the bottom of my darkest times, I learned the difference between being alive and feeling alive. And I truly hope you do too. Whenever something happens in your lives that makes you feel powerless. Cancer was the way that I had to go along in order to cut the unhealthy chains in my life and realize that true peace can only come from the inside out. But it doesn't have to be an illness. Whatever challenge you might be facing, confront it, own it, go all the way, fight the good fight. Because that crisis might just be the greatest opportunity of your lives. If I hadn't owned my illness, I too would have probably been overwhelmed by fear in front of the equation, cancer equals death. But as I decided to see it for myself and ultimately trust only my instinct, it changed. And for me, actually, cancer became a rebirth. The poet Gibran expresses the way I feel by talking of waking at dawn with a winged heart and giving thanks for another day of loving. So do not be afraid if a hardship causes you to re-question everything you have and everything you are. Wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving. Thank you.